So channels and trend lines, these are what we use to visualize and confirm what the overall trend is. And so these are really useful tools for helping us make that decision of what the trend is, and then therefore which direction we need to be trading. And so generally trend lines are used for shorter term moves, and then channels are used for broader overall trends and seeing what the larger trend is doing. Now, trend lines also essentially are just half of a trend channel. Channels are just made up of a trend line and then it duplicated on the other side of the market. If it was drawn off the lows, you just drag it up and put it on the highs. We'll definitely get into examples of that. And then a trend channel usually has a midline, and we'll talk about that too. And then how do we confirm these? And so usually what we want to confirm a line is 3 touches, because if we only have 2 touches, that really doesn't confirm that we have a trend line. We want to be seeing multiple times the market has touched this level and pretty much shown us that yes, this is a support level that the market is respecting. And so then that shows us that, oh, this is a level that the market's respecting. And so we can bet on that holding or taking a trade off of that level. So here we're looking at our chart again. Let's draw a trend line for this upwards trend right here, right? So get my drawing tool line. And so how we want to draw these is we always want to start from the most prominent recent low, or if in a downtrend, the most prominent recent high, right? And so down here, this is for the uptrend, this is the most prominent recent low. And so we're gonna go all the way to the bottom of that candle. So we're at the actual low. And then we're just gonna drag our line and see where it fits best. So this might be an area where it fits pretty good, but we want to try and touch the lows that it's making as it makes its uptrend. So if I just quickly get my drawing tool out here, as we kind of make this stair step pattern up, we want to touch those areas with our drawing tool, because that's going to show us kind of where the actual trend is. And so not everything's going to fit perfectly. You just want to see kind of what fits best. So some quick rules here is when you're starting, you always want to start from the actual low. And then as you draw the trend line or trend channel, you can see here, I've actually touched it to kind of just where it fits on the candles, kind of touching either the closes or the opens of the candles can work. And then also up here, this is just the kind of the low of the candle. And so a big thing is trend lines and trend channels they're just visuals for us. We want to make sure they fit the current trend as best as possible, because in the end, they're just for us and the market doesn't respect them at all, right? It's just a good visual way for us to understand what is going on. And so it's okay if your trend channel is touching a few different places in the market or on the candlesticks as it goes up. And so as you start to see more and more examples, that'll start to make sense. It's always best to try and have your channel fit as best as possible. But once you have this drawn here, you're not going to want to move it as you see the market. You don't want to move it to here once you see the market move. When you see these touches here, and that kind of confirms this trend, and we'll get into later what that means once it starts to break those trend lines and what that tells us for the current trend. For a trend channel here, they're pretty much the same thing, except you just match it to the other side. And so here's a trend channel. Again, we're just going to draw it off the lows and then match it. And then we're just it'll just match to the other side. And so what we want to do is just match it to the best looking highs here. And so this is the most recent high here. And so I'm just going to put it there. And then you can see it kind of respects it up here. So once it gets to the upwards part of the channel, it's going to start seeing that as resistance. And so that is one key thing when you're trading is if you have a channel, don't take a trade at the top of the channel, because that is a resistance area. You want to be taking trades at the bottom areas of the channel if you're in an upwards trend, because that is, again, we're looking for the highest probability areas to trade. And so in an upwards trend, the bottom part of the channel is going to be the best part to be taking trades in. Even if you have a good setup at the upwards area of the channel, that is still going to be a trade you're going to want to skip on, because there is that resistance area of the overall trend. And again, the overall trend is the most important thing and the most foundational concept with our trading. Another example here, let's actually just zoom out on the day. And so as the day progresses and as you're analyzing the chart, you're going to want to have trend lines and trend channels of different parts of the chart. And so what I mean by that is we want to see an overall trend channel for the day. And so this is essentially the overnight low. And then here's the open of today. And here we are currently trading at. And so when you first come in and as the day progresses, you want to be looking at the overall trend as well. And so here, this is the most prominent low from the overnight session. If we zoom out even more, this is the previous day. And so we're not really interested in that too much. We're just wanting to, again, analyze the trend over today. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to get our trend channel tool. I'm going to click on the low here and just see where this fits so we can get an idea of what kind of trend we're in for the day. And so this looks like it kind of fits. It touches those two lows, and then I'm just going to snap it to the top somewhere. So this could work. And then this actually looks like this kind of fits a little better. And so one thing as well here is this doesn't have to match perfectly. Now, it fits pretty good. And another way we can actually look to confirm the trend line and also just use the trend line is this midline right here, right? And so this is a line that is exactly in the middle of the channel, and it counts as support and resistance as well. And so you can see as the chart comes and hits this midline here, the chart tends to chop around in this area of the midline, right? And so sometimes it'll come up and it'll act as resistance. And so that is another way you can start to evaluate your channel, and just another way to use your channel. Generally, in any channel, again, the better trades are going to be at the extremes of the channel, right? Always trading at either the lows of the channel or the highs of the channel are going to be your best bet. Trading somewhere in the middle of the channel can cause congestion and sideways chop, and that is not what we want when we're trading. Now, one thing that we actually use trend lines for more of, if we just zoom in on the kind of the most current price action, is sometimes the market will have some pretty crazy moves where it just goes straight up and then straight down, right? And so that doesn't give us time to start to draw a trend channel. We still want to know what's going on in the chart, right? And we want to keep track of that. And so what we can do here is just draw a trend line matching these lows here, kind of where it makes a couple lows, and that'll still give us a rough idea of what's going on. You could essentially make this into a channel, but generally these are just really tiny channels. And so a trend line is good enough for that visualization, right? And so you can see here on the flip side here, it also made kind of a trend line down here. And so that is something that we can just draw to kind of get an idea of what's going on, especially if you're not sure what's happening. Always trying to just visualize and either zoom in, zoom out, and see what is going on in the chart. To see kind of where we're at right now, if we just take a trend channel here, because we've kind of, now that we have seen some price movement, we can start to look at where a channel is again, right? So if we draw off the low here, kind of match it to the lows that it's making, and then just flip it to the high here, right? And so here, this kind of looks like a channel that the market is currently in. And maybe as we start to get to the top of this channel, the market is going to sell back off and come and touch the bottom of our channel. And that is where we would potentially look for a trade again. We have identified here that we are in an upwards trend, But again, we don't want to be taking a trend at the top of the channel. We want to be taking a trade when it sells back off to the bottom of the channel. And so we're not going to watch this and look for a setup because that's, we're not at that part of the course yet. But as you can see here, it's kind of starting to sell off towards the bottom of that channel and that area that we would actually want to be looking for a trade. So now let's talk about actually another type of channel. So let's go back to our part of the chart that we're looking at. And so channels will generally be drawn off the most prominent low or the most prominent high, but sometimes you'll have something that's called a spike and channel. And so what I mean by that is sometimes the market will make a very quick move. It'll move down very fast or up, and then it'll go into a channel. And so that's what we have right here. We have something that the market moved very quickly, and then it goes into an actual trend. If you try to draw a trend off the high here, it doesn't really tell you much. And that is because this is actually one of those places where you have a spike and channel. And so what we want to do is draw it off the most recent high after that spike, and then you can start to match it to the highs here, and then we can put it down to the lows right here. And so here you can see this channel actually fits really well, and this would allow us to take a lot of trades off of this. Here you can kind of, after this point, you pretty much have the channel confirmed because it's made essentially 3 touches there, and then you just drag it down to the bottom. And so when you actually draw channels, you won't always know where the bottom or the top is. So if we initially drew this channel off the 3 highs right here, and we hadn't had these bottoms to draw it off of yet, you can just draw your channel and then leave the bottom and then move it as you get updated with data. Now, in a downtrend, you can move the bottom part of the channel, but never move the top part of the channel. And then with an uptrend here, you can move the top part of the channel, but never move the support side of the channel. And so that is a very key thing, because you will have channels that you don't know if it's a midline or not, right? And so what I mean by that is this channel right here could be double the size, and this resistance line here could have just been a midline. And we don't know that until we can actually have a bigger idea and more data on the channel. And so that is why we have that flexibility in drawing with the trend channels. And so in this case here though, this was just a channel here. And so going back to this channel here is very solid once you kind of have these 3 tops in here and then drawing it off the bottom. And then as well, looking at that midline, you can see it acts as resistance here a lot. And then also once it starts to break to the upside, it actually acts as support. And so again, be aware of that midline. It can be helpful, but it can also be detrimental. So quickly looking at this trend change here, right? How would we then draw this next channel? All we would do is just go to channels, and off this new low, we just draw and match where it fits, right? And so it's matching off those lows, and then we just match the highs, right? And then eventually it breaks. But so this is just how you draw trends and channels. And so this will be very helpful in our trading strategy. Now, what does it mean when a trend channel breaks? And so what we call these is a trend break and a trend overshoot. And so trend breaks are when price breaks counter trend. If we're in a downtrend here, a trend break is when it breaks to the upside. And so what these like to do is they like to retest the most recent extreme, either a high or low. And so what that means is in a downwards trend, when we have a trend break, the market will like to then make a retest of this low. It'll either make a new low or it'll make a move in that direction in some fashion. And then in an uptrend, a trend break will be to the downside. And when it does that, it will try and retest that high before it changes its trend. Now with trend breaks, this doesn't always happen. Sometimes you will have a trend just break and then sell off right away. But this is one thing to keep in mind as we start to look forwards. Now, an overshoot is when price breaks with the trend. And so what that means is in this downwards channel we have here, if the price broke all the way through the bottom of our channel. Now, I know we did just talk about that you can move the bottom of that channel, but once you have a confirmed bottom of that channel, you don't want to be moving that. When it does make a break to the low side, prices should attempt to retest the trend line here and then continue with the trend or decide to reverse to the upside. And so these are really key concepts with understanding trend shifts and where the trend is going to go after it breaks your channel you have spent so much time drawing, right? Because it can be really frustrating when you have a perfect setup channel and then it decides to break that, right? Just when you're about to take a trade with it. So let's look at some example of these. And so here we have that upwards channel. And so this is a trend break because we are breaking counter trend to the channel. And so what happens here is we have a trend break and then it attempts to retest that high we just had. It's not always going to retest it. Like this is a perfect example where it retests it to the exact price. Sometimes you'll have it overshoot the price and then go down, or sometimes you'll have it just retest and then go down. But the idea here is this is what's going to happen a lot of the time when a trend breaks. It's going to make this retest here. So here we have a really solid up channel here, and then we have an overshoot. And so once an overshoot happens, we're going to expect it to retest the bottom of the channel before starting to change trend. And then when we have that retest, we're generally going to expect it to make a new extreme with the direction of the trend. So here we can see it makes a new high and then it starts to shift trend. And so once it does that overshoot, we're going to expect the trend to shift and this channel that we're in to not be valid anymore. And so at that point, we're going to want to start reevaluating the trend and looking to draw another channel. So moving on to another example here, we have another upwards channel. We have a trend break, and then it looks to retest the highs. And you can see just because it breaks the trend, right, and retests, it doesn't mean it's going to start a sell-off. But it does generally mean the trend is now shifting. And so don't expect the channel that you just had to be holding. You can see here, once it makes this break, it makes a new retest. We go in a little sideways chop here, and then it starts to do some sideways chop or larger sideways channel. And so that is one of the biggest keys. If you're still really new to understanding this, is that at least take away that when you see a channel break, that trend is over. You can almost delete that channel now because it's not going to be useful to you. Generally, when I trade, once I have a channel break like this, I don't leave it on my chart very often because otherwise you would have so many channels and drawings and lines on your chart. And at that point, they're just not useful. You want to be having your chart as clean as possible because, again, we're just looking to read the price action. And the channels and trend lines, they're just for our benefit. And so if you have so many of them, they're actually going to not benefit you anymore. It's going to start looking like clutter and it's going to get confusing. And so that's what we don't want, right? And so here is another example of an overshoot. And so here's in a downtrend, right? So here we have a nice downwards channel confirmed off the bottom, confirmed off the highs. Again, this is just another example to say this isn't nothing in the stock market is a fact. We're not going to say, oh, we have a trend break, we're just going to come back and hit. This is a example where we just have the market just decides to just blast through this support level and it doesn't look back, right? It just goes down and then it sells off even more, right? And so just be aware of that when you're looking for what the market's going to do after a trend break or an overshoot. These are guidelines on what they normally do or one thing that they do. But again, this can happen as well. So again, be careful of that. How do we trade these overshoots and trend breaks? Now, again, number one, be cautious. They're definitely a little bit more of an advanced kind of technique. The easier trades are just when you have an upwards channel is buying off the bottom of the channel. This is always a higher probability trade. And so you don't have to be taking these more advanced kind of strategy or trend strategies right away. Just be aware of them and start to understand them. With overshoots and trend breaks, we pretty much always take them in the direction of that channel trend. So if we have a trend break here, we're looking for a trade to the long side because it's going to retest that high. If we have a trend overshoot, we're looking for it to come back, retest, and then we're going to look for a trade to the upside from there. And so again, always trade with the trend and even with these overshoots and trend breaks. Now to show some examples from today's chart, and that chart we were just looking at, right? That first channel that we drew, if I just draw it again here, that was a trend break. If I just draw this again, here's the lows, here's the highs, we have a trend break right here. And you can see that rule, it broke the trend and then retest and actually made a new extreme here, made a new high, and then again, the trend started to shift, right? And so that is the biggest thing is with looking with these is this is the area we would look to take a trade potentially as it puts a new extreme in. And then once that is done, we want to be aware and just kind of sit on the sidelines until we see what happens to the new trend, because this is a trend changing sign and we always want to know where the trend is going. And if we don't know where the trend is, that is our number one thing. We don't want to take a trade. And so until you start to see this sideways trend, you don't know where the trend is and you want to sit on the sidelines. Now, if we go to that spike in channel we were just looking at, this I believe was a trend break as well. And it doesn't take much to show that it's a trend break right here. This is just a tiny little trend break, but you can see it makes a trend break and then it attempts to test the lows or make a new extreme. And it actually does that. It makes a new low here and then it reverses. This is just kind of how these trend channels work. They are really important to understanding where the trend shifts are happening. Now, in the next section, we're actually going to talk about sideways channels and horizontal support and resistance.